The chamber was already tense when Ted Cruz leaned forward in his chair, cutting through Jasmine Crockett's words with his 6th interruption of the afternoon. His voice was sharp, dismissive, carrying the practiced arrogance of someone who had long mistaken volume for authority. Senators shifted in their seats. Staffers whispered nervously. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of irritation that crossed Crockett's face. She had been patient until now. Her answers had been clipped but steady, her tone measured against the relentless needling from across the aisle. Yet with every break in her words, every dismissive wave of Cruz's hand, the tension thickened like storm clouds gathering over the Capitol dome. "Let me finish my point," Crockett said evenly, her eyes narrowing, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. But before she could continue, Cruz barreled over her again, his tone smug, as if the act of drowning her out was victory in itself. The room murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. Viewers at home could sense it. Something was building. The 6th interruption wasn't just another display of political arrogance. It was a spark threatening to ignite into something unforgettable. Crockett leaned back slightly, folding her hands, her silence sharper than any retort. She knew the cameras were on her, and her composure spoke louder than Cruz's bluster. For those watching, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. One figure boiling with entitlement, the other radiating a calm strength that felt unshakable. Cruz mistook that silence for weakness. He had no idea it was the calm before the storm. By now, the chamber was caught in the spectacle. Staffers traded looks. Even those accustomed to Washington brawls felt something unusual humming in the air. Crockett's eyes held steady, as if waiting for the exact moment to strike back. Not out of anger, but with precision. The cameras didn't miss it, her lips pressing together, her jaw tightening, her gaze fixing squarely on Cruz as he prepared to open his mouth yet again. He leaned in with that familiar, condescending smirk, ready to deliver interruption number 7, but no one expected what happened on the 7th interruption. The silence that followed. His 7th attempt was unlike anything the Senate chamber had heard in years. The chamber held its breath. What had begun as just another heated exchange was no longer routine political theater. It was becoming a test of something larger, a collision between two worlds that rarely meet on equal ground. On one side sat Ted Cruz, armed with years of status, privilege, and the easy confidence of a man who had rarely been forced to yield the floor. On the other stood Jasmine Crockett, a freshman congresswoman, a black woman, a lawyer who had clawed her way through obstacles most of her colleagues could barely imagine.
This was not merely a clash of words. It was a battle over who gets to be heard in America, and who is told again and again to sit down, be quiet, and wait their turn. Every time Cruz cut her off, it echoed the dismissal she had endured her entire life, the interruptions familiar to every woman who has spoken in a room of men who believed their voice carried more weight. But Crockett's calm presence was a weapon of its own. Where Cruz was bluster, she was steady. Where he rushed, she measured each phrase like it had been etched in stone. That contrast grew sharper with every interruption, and those watching could feel the polarity pulling them toward one inevitable conclusion. The cameras made sure no one missed the details. Cruz leaning forward, jabbing the air with his finger. Crockett sitting taller, her eyes narrowing but never breaking. The image was powerful, almost archetypal. The entrenched senator, polished by decades of Washington combat, trying to muscle over a voice he did not think belonged at his level. Yet here she was, refusing to yield, refusing to flinch. For many in the chamber, it was a familiar Cruz performance, forceful, theatrical, destined for clips to be replayed on partisan networks. But outside those walls, the optics told a different story. Viewers across the country, especially those who knew the sting of dismissal in their own lives, were leaning closer to their screens. They weren't just seeing another exchange in a congressional hearing. They were watching dignity under fire, composure tested by arrogance, and a showdown that carried the weight of history. It mattered because Crockett was not simply representing herself. She was carrying the voices of every woman who had been told they were too loud, every immigrant who had been brushed aside, every young person who had been underestimated by those clinging to power. She did not raise her voice because she did not need to. Her presence alone reminded America of the stakes. And it mattered because Cruz could not see it. He thought this was his arena, his script, his performance. He believed interrupting her 6 times proved dominance, when in reality it proved desperation. Viewers watching closely could see it. his jabs growing sharper, his tone rising, his confidence slipping as he tried to regain control of a narrative already tilting against him. The Senate chamber was just the stage, but the audience was the nation. Twitter was alive with half-sentences and hashtags forming in real time. TikTok creators clipped his interruptions side by side, building a rhythm of arrogance that only heightened anticipation for the inevitable backlash. Commentators whispered that Crockett's restraint was more dangerous to Cruz than any outburst could be, and yet most viewers didn't know the half of it. They thought they were just watching another skirmish, another viral clip destined to burn out in a day. What they didn't realize was that interruption number 7 was approaching, the moment that would not only shatter the chamber's rhythm, but also rewrite Cruz's image forever. Ted Cruz has never been a stranger to confrontation. For years, he has built his reputation not on consensus or quiet leadership, but on performance loud, abrasive, and crafted for the cameras. Where others sought compromise, Cruz sought spectacle. His interruptions, his monologues, his carefully rehearsed outrage, all became hallmarks of a senator who seemed less concerned with governing than with scoring the next viral clip. Cruz's colleagues know this pattern well. In hearings, he is the first to raise his voice, the first to talk over witnesses, the first to hijack the room with a pointed lecture. To him, a question is not meant to elicit an answer, but to trap, to grandstand, to corner the target into silence. It is a style that has earned him fans among the faithful, but left him reviled by those who see politics as something more than theater. His interruptions are not random bursts of impatience, they are strategic. He deploys them like weapons, cutting into an opponent's rhythm, destabilizing their confidence, making sure their points never land with full force. For years, this tactic has allowed him to dominate debates and bully opponents into submission. His voice barrels through like a freight train, flattening nuance, suffocating rebuttals. And then there's the infamous Cruz demeanor, the smug professor energy that has become his calling card. He leans back in his chair with an air of superiority, speaking as if the world is his classroom and every opponent is an unprepared student. His words drip with condescension. His smirk, practiced and polished, often lands harder than the arguments themselves. It is a performance designed to provoke, to remind everyone in the room that Ted Cruz believes he is the smartest man there. The American public has seen this show many times before. In Senate hearings, on debate stages, and in press conferences, Cruz has made a habit of turning serious moments into personal showcases. He interrupts scientists with monologues about climate change skepticism. He talks over colleagues with rhetorical flourishes about constitutional law. He derails witness testimonies, insisting his version of the truth must dominate the record. Each time he leans into the camera, knowing that even outrage can be clipped into a shareable moment. But his arrogance has often backfired. Voters remember his self-imposed role as the antagonist during the 2016 presidential primaries, how he clashed with nearly everyone, his sharp tongue winning him headlines but costing him allies. They remember the government shutdown he helped orchestrate, his speech dragging on for hours as he read from Green Eggs and Ham in a bizarre display of stubbornness. They remember his tone-deaf choices, like fleeing to Cancun while his state froze in darkness, only to return with excuses that deepened the mockery. Each of these moments painted a consistent portrait. A man more concerned with attention than with service, more invested in performance than in people. The smugness, the interruptions, the relentless hunger for the spotlight, it became the Cruz brand. And while it has earned him a devoted base, it has also made him a lightning rod of contempt for millions of Americans who see in him the embodiment of political arrogance. His colleagues in Washington whisper about it behind closed doors. That Cruz is brilliant, yes, but insufferable. That he is calculating, yes, but never trusted. That he is effective in cutting down opponents, but in doing so, he leaves only resentment behind. His sharpness, once a tool, has dulled into predictability. Every interruption, every smirk, every arrogant flourish feels rehearsed, expected, stale, and that is where he miscalculated. Because while Cruz saw Jasmine Crockett as another opponent to bulldoze, another chance to flex his trademark interruptions, the reality was different. Crockett was not a seasoned insider worn down by years of Washington arrogance. She was sharp, fresh, unafraid, and unwilling to be another notch in Cruz's belt of silenced voices. The irony is striking. Cruz's very tactics, the ones that had carried him through years of hearings and debates, became the same tactics that set him up for the fall. His arrogance had worked before, but now it came off as dated, tired, and, in the presence of Crockett's composure, desperate. What once made him appear strong now revealed cracks of insecurity. For the millions watching, this realization was slow but steady. They had seen Cruz interrupt countless voices before. They had rolled their eyes at his smug tone, at his eagerness to dominate. But this time felt different. The arrogance was familiar, but the response he would soon provoke was not. Crockett's steady composure was more dangerous than any fiery outburst he might have anticipated. She wasn't rattled, she was waiting. And as he prepared to unleash interruption number 7, his trademark tactics sharpened and ready. He didn't realize he was stepping into a trap of his own making, because this time, the story would not end with Cruz smirking into the cameras, satisfied with another performance. This time he picked the wrong target. Before Jasmine Crockett ever set foot in the chamber where she would face Ted Cruz, her life had already been a testament to resilience, grit, and an unshakable belief in justice. Born and raised in Texas, she grew up with a front-row seat to the contradictions of American life. Communities starved of resources yet rich in spirit. Neighbors overlooked by power but overflowing with dignity. Those contradictions didn't just shape her. They lit a fire in her that would carry her into the courtroom, into politics, and eventually into the national spotlight. Crockett's path was not paved with privilege. As a young black woman entering law school, she was reminded constantly, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in blunt, humiliating terms, that the system was not built with her in mind. Professors questioned her sharpness, peers underestimated her preparation, and in more than one courtroom, opposing counsel attempted to talk over her, diminish her, or reduce her to silence. But silence was never an option. She met every interruption with facts, every condescending remark with mastery, every slight with poise sharpened by preparation. In Texas courtrooms, her presence became impossible to ignore. Clients who felt the system had abandoned them saw in her someone who not only listened, but fought tooth and nail. She carried herself with a calm intensity, never shouting, never grandstanding, but making her argument so precise, so meticulously layered, that juries leaned in, judges took notice, and opponents scrambled to keep up. In those rooms, she learned that patience wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She discovered that sometimes the most devastating blow is not the loudest, but the one delivered at exactly the right time. Her rise in politics followed a similar arc. As she campaigned for office, Crockett faced the double bind so many women of color endure. Too soft, and she'd be dismissed as inexperienced. Too strong, and she'd be branded angry. She threaded the needle with discipline. She spoke passionately about justice reform, about expanding access to health care, about protecting communities too often ignored. She faced down racist dog whistles and coded language hurled her way, but she refused to bend. For every attempt to belittle her, there was a voter who saw her as their champion. For every dismissal, there was a door she knocked on that opened to someone hungry for a leader who understood their struggle. Every step of her journey was sharpened by obstacles. She wasn't born into dynasties of power. She wasn't carried by family name or inherited networks. Instead, she built her credibility the hard way, case by case, speech by speech, moment by moment, until her voice became one that could no longer be ignored. The weight of expectation rested on her shoulders, but so did the pride of those who had been told they didn't belong. And this weight was not just her own. Crockett carried with her the voices of generations who had been silenced. She carried the echoes of black women who had been interrupted, overlooked, erased from history. She carried the resilience of immigrant families who had been told their accents, their traditions, their very existence didn't count in the halls of power. She carried the fire of young activists demanding a better America, and the quiet dignity of elders who had fought too long just to be heard. Her calmness in the chamber was not the absence of fire. It was fire contained, disciplined, honed. Behind her narrowed eyes and measured tone lived 1,000 stories of dismissal, 1,000 battles fought in classrooms, courtrooms, and campaign trails. She knew what it meant to be underestimated. She knew what it meant to be spoken over. She knew the cost of composure in a world that rewards arrogance. And still she held her ground, because she had learned the lesson that so many before her had taught. Dignity is not surrender, and silence is not weakness. That is why the confrontation with Cruz carried stakes far beyond the present moment. For Cruz, it was another opportunity to grandstand, another chance to drown out an opponent with sheer force of voice. But for Crockett, it was another test in a long line of trials. And like every trial before, she had come prepared with the discipline of a lawyer who knew her case inside and out, prepared with the resilience of a politician who had endured every coded attack, prepared with the calm ferocity of a woman who understood that Sometimes the loudest noise collapses under the weight of a single, well-placed sentence. Viewers at home could sense it, even if they didn't know her full story. They could feel the steadiness in her posture, the poise in her voice, the resolve etched into her silence. This was not just a political exchange. This was a generational reckoning. She was carrying more than her own pride. She was carrying the unfinished business of history. And that weight, heavy with the voices of those who had been silenced, was about to land squarely on Ted Cruz. The hearing began like so many before it. Routine questions, polite acknowledgments, the formal cadence of government business. But it didn't take long for Ted Cruz to break the rhythm. The very moment Jasmine Crockett began her opening remarks, he leaned forward, cutting in before she could finish her first point. That was interruption number 1. His voice, sharp and self-assured, rode over hers as though her presence was incidental, as though his commentary was the only thing the record needed. Crockett stopped, glanced at him, then calmly reclaimed her words. The second interruption came minutes later. She had begun to lay out a carefully constructed argument, citing precedent and drawing lines of accountability. Cruz sliced in again, this time with a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. He tried to corner her with a loaded question, the kind designed not to seek truth but to force her into defending herself. Crockett didn't flinch. Her response was clipped but firm. "If you'll allow me to finish, Senator, I can answer your question directly." The chamber buzzed with murmurs. Already people were taking notice. By the third interruption, the tension was palpable. Crockett's voice grew a shade stronger, her eyes narrowing with focus. She spoke over Cruz just enough to keep her threat alive, refusing to yield completely. It was a delicate balancing act, holding composure while resisting the urge to lash out. Staffers scribbled notes, cameras captured every movement, and the audience could feel the stakes rising. Cruz, mistaking her discipline for fragility, leaned in harder. The fourth interruption was the most brazen yet. Crockett had paused briefly to collect her thoughts, and Cruz pounced on the silence, flooding the chamber with his own monologue. He gestured grandly, his voice booming, as though the microphone and cameras belonged to him alone. Crockett's jaw tightened, but she didn't let her composure break. Instead, she waited. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, she re-entered with the precision of a lawyer reclaiming control of the courtroom. "Respectfully, Senator, I was not finished." The quiet steel in her tone turned heads. Interruption number 5 came almost immediately after, and by now the chamber had split into two invisible camps, those who rolled their eyes at Cruz's antics, and those who watched Crockett closely, sensing that her restraint was leading somewhere. Cruz raised his voice, trying to steamroll, but Crockett lifted hers just enough to rise above him. It wasn't shouting, it was clarity, sharpened and undeniable. Her words carried, ringing through the chamber, layered with a conviction that only grew stronger under pressure. The sixth interruption was the breaking point for many in the room. Cruz cut her off mid-sentence yet again, his tone dripping with condescension, his fingers stabbing the air as if punctuation were power. This time, Crockett leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands folding together. She didn't try to overpower him. She let the moment breathe, let him take the rope, let the smugness play out before the cameras. Then with deliberate calm, she leaned forward and spoke. Each word chosen, each phrase steady, her gaze locking on Cruz with unflinching resolve. The chamber hushed. By now the pattern was undeniable. 6 interruptions, 6 attempts to drown her out, 6 moments that revealed more about Cruz's desperation than her ability to stand tall. And yet Crockett had not snapped. She had not surrendered to anger. She had allowed the tension to build, allowed the arrogance to stack higher and higher, until the whole performance teetered on collapse. The audience, both in the chamber and across the nation, leaned in. Would she finally break? Would the silence turn to fury? Would the carefully contained fire burst into flame? The anticipation was electric, the kind of suspense that made every second feel stretched thin, like a violin string pulled to the brink. But Crockett knew the lesson she had carried from courtrooms and campaign trails. Timing is everything, and her timing was impeccable. She wasn't waiting for relief. She was waiting for the moment that would cut through the noise, silence the bluster, and shift the ground beneath Cruz's feet. And that moment was coming, because interruption number 7 was next. And it was interruption number 7 that set the stage for the unforgettable blow. The 7th interruption came not as a slip of the tongue, but as a weapon. Ted Cruz had waited, letting Jasmine Crockett build momentum, allowing her cadence to grow, only so he could step in and rip the floor away. He leaned in, his chair creaking forward, a smirk already painted across his face. His voice cut through like a foghorn, dismissive, mocking, confident in his ability to derail her. "Ms. Crockett, that's irrelevant," he sneered, hands gesturing wide as if he were the arbiter of what mattered. Cameras zoomed in, eager to capture the clash. Cruz, basking in his own performance, believed this interruption, number 7, would finally silence her, but he miscalculated. Crockett didn't jump in, didn't rush to speak over him. Instead, she stopped. Her pen tapped once against the desk. She inhaled deeply, her eyes lifting from her notes to scan the chamber. The pause stretched, pulling every ear and eye toward her. It was the calm before the storm, and everyone in the room could feel it. Cruz continued, filling the silence with his self-assurance. His words puffed up with the confidence of someone who had rarely been challenged. But Crockett's silence, measured, deliberate, was louder than anything he said. Her gaze swept across the audience, then locked back on Cruz. And then she spoke. "Senator, the only thing irrelevant in this room," she began, her voice steady but carrying a hidden fire, "is your constant interruptions. You have mistaken my patience for weakness, and my silence for surrender. But let me make something very clear. This chamber belongs to the people, not your ego." The words sliced through the air like a blade. The murmurs that followed were immediate. Aides glanced at each other, wide-eyed. Some smirked quietly, their lips twitching as though suppressing laughter. Others shook their heads in disbelief, marveling at the precision of her strike. Cruz blinked. For the first time that day, his composure faltered. He reached for the papers in front of him, shuffling them with awkward urgency. His trademark smug grin melted into something more forced, the kind of smile people wear when they're trying to pretend they're unfazed. But the cameras had already caught it. The slight stammer in his breathing, the twitch in his jaw. Crockett didn't stop. She leaned forward, her tone gathering strength with each word.
"You've spent years perfecting this act."
"Grandstanding, talking over women, drowning out voices you don't respect. But Senator, I didn't come here to audition for your approval. I came here to speak the truth, and no matter how many times you interrupt me, that truth will be heard." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the weight of recognition. Everyone in the chamber knew they had just witnessed something bigger than a simple exchange. Crockett's words hadn't just pushed back against Cruz, they had dismantled his entire persona. The camera cut to Cruz again. His lips parted as if to reply, but nothing came out. His throat bobbed, his eyes darting to the aides behind him. He picked up his pen, put it down, straightened his papers again. The performance was unraveling. The man who prided himself on always having the last word suddenly had none. And Crockett, sensing the shift, delivered the final twist of the knife. "Interrupt me 7 times if you must," she said, her eyes burning into his. "But understand this, every time you try to silence me, you only prove why my voice, and the voices of women like me, are necessary in this room." A gasp rippled through the audience. It wasn't dramatic in volume, it was sharp in realization. People knew this wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a declaration, a line in the sand. The reaction shots told the story better than words ever could. One aide leaned back, lips curling into the faintest grin. Another shook her head slowly, mouthing, "Wow." A staffer behind Crockett lowered his gaze to hide a smirk, knowing full well the clip would dominate headlines within hours. Even a few senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the tension too thick to ignore. Cruz, however, looked small in that moment. His shoulders hunched as he fumbled with his notes. The swagger that had carried him through 6 interruptions evaporated. His mouth opened again, this time to mutter something barely audible, a stammer that stumbled into half-finished words. But the silence in the chamber swallowed him whole. The villain had collapsed, undone not by volume or fury, but by Crockett's unshakable precision. For Crockett, it wasn't a victory measured in applause or cheers. It was measured in the silence that followed. The silence of a man with nothing left to say. The silence of a room that understood the gravity of what had just happened. She had turned his 7th interruption into his undoing. The moment stretched on. Cameras zoomed tighter. Crockett leaned back in her chair, her face calm once more, the fire tucked neatly behind her steady expression. It was as though she had planned it all along, as though she had known the 7th interruption would be the moment she'd deliver the strike. And for viewers at home, the image was unforgettable. Ted Cruz, shuffling, rattled, diminished. Jasmine Crockett, poised, unbroken, victorious without ever raising her voice. What came next wasn't noise or chaos. It was validation. The chamber itself seemed to exhale. Murmurs spread quietly. Nods of agreement slipped across faces. And even those who dared not openly smile carried the weight of hidden satisfaction. The villain had been checked, and the hero had risen. Cruz's collapse wasn't physical, it was reputational. The man who prided himself on dominance had been reduced to fumbling silence. And Crockett hadn't just defended herself. She had spoken for generations who had been interrupted, dismissed, and silenced. Her words echoed far beyond the chamber walls. And as the cameras captured the moment in crisp detail, America knew what it had just witnessed. This wasn't just a clapback. It was history being written in real time. Because interruption number 7 hadn't silenced Jasmine Crockett. It had silenced Ted Cruz. And the ripple effect was immediate. The chamber had gone still, but the country did not. Within minutes, phones lit up across the nation. Staffers who had discreetly recorded the exchange hit send, and the EI clip shot across timelines like a lightning strike. By the time the hearing adjourned, Wasa Crockett vs. Cruz was already trending. On TikTok, users spliced the moment into short, looping edits, pairing Crockett's words with music that amplified their sting. One viral cut slowed the instant Cruz shuffled his papers, captioned simply, "When the professor gets schooled." Another set her mic drop to a bass drop, garnering millions of views overnight.
Twitter, still the political junkies' arena, erupted. Commentators from across the spectrum weighed in. Progressive voices hailed it as a turning point, while even some conservatives admitted, grudgingly, that Cruz had been caught flat-footed. One tweet shared hundreds of thousands of times. Read, she didn't just silence Cruz. She reminded every woman in America what strength looks like under fire. Late-night shows wasted no time. Monologues replayed the clip, pausing to let the audience laugh at Cruz's awkward shuffle. One host leaned into the camera and quipped, "Ted Cruz has finally found something he can't talk over. Reality," the audience roared, the laughter cementing the cultural verdict. But it wasn't only entertainers and pundits carrying the message forward. Everyday Americans felt seen. A mother in Detroit posted a shaky selfie video, tears in her eyes, saying, "When she told him the chamber belongs to the people, not his ego, I swear, I felt like she was talking for all of us, who've been ignored." A young college student in Houston tweeted, "I've had professors interrupt me exactly like Cruz did, and I've never had the words Crockett used. I'm saving this clip forever." The resonance wasn't limited to one demographic. Immigrants saw in Crockett's defiance the same courage they'd needed to speak up in boardrooms, classrooms, and workplaces where their accents or heritage had been used against them. Women of color, in particular, elevated the clip as more than politics. It was personal. One viral Facebook post summed it up: generations of silence answered in one sentence. Cruz, meanwhile, became a walking punchline. Memes painted him as the man defeated by silence, the senator who fumbled at the one. Skill he prided himself on, commanding the floor. A popular meme superimposed his fumbling reaction onto the Titanic violinists, captioned, "Playing himself off." Another compared his collapse to a boxer. Dropped in the first round, news outlets leaned into the drama. Headlines blared, "Crockett schools, Cruz in stunning Senate showdown," and "Cruz interrupted." Then silenced, cable news panels replayed the footage, analyzing Crockett's delivery as though it were a championship knockout. Even conservative outlets, though critical of her, admitted the moment was a PR disaster for Cruz. Yet the deeper current wasn't just about spectacle. The response revealed something raw about the national mood. People weren't just entertained, they were validated. They had seen a woman of color, often marginalized and dismissed, flip the script on one of the most practiced interrupters in American politics. It was more than a viral moment. It was vindication.
The hashtags told the story. She spoke for us. Let her speak. A mic drop Crockett. And under each, testimonies poured in. Women recounting workplace battles, immigrants recalling times they'd been cut off, young people recognizing their own frustrations mirrored in that chamber exchange. Crockett had become not just a representative, but a symbol. And Cruz, his reputation already polarizing, took another hit. The smug professor persona that once carried him through hearings now looked brittle, even laughable. His 7th interruption, meant to establish dominance, became the very moment that exposed his fragility. By the week's end, the clip wasn't just news. It was history in the making, etched into the collective memory of a country hungry for accountability. But beyond the memes, beyond the laughter and hashtags, there was something deeper stirring, something that hinted this moment was more than viral entertainment. It was a signal of change. In the days after the clash, as the dust settled and the memes multiplied, Representative Jasmine Crockett chose not to bask in the attention. Instead, she reframed the moment, not as a personal victory, not as a partisan skirmish, but as a lesson about something bigger. When asked by reporters what gave her the strength to remain calm, she answered with quiet clarity, "Dignity will always outlast arrogance, and truth will always ring louder than noise." That single sentence echoed far beyond the chamber walls. It carried a resonance that reminded the country of something fundamental. This was never just about a verbal sparring match. It was about what kind of politics Americans want to define them. Do we celebrate the loudest voice in the room, or do we honor the one who speaks with purpose and respect? For women, especially women of color, the moment stood as proof that restraint is not weakness, and that standing firm in the face of disrespect is itself an act of power. Crockett had not met Cruz's interruptions with equal bluster. She had not played his game. Instead, she had played her own and won. That message rippled outward, reminding countless viewers of their own moments when they had been talked over, disregarded, or silenced. Her example became a mirror, reflecting back the courage they already held inside. And for the broader public, the confrontation distilled into a simple but timeless truth. Democracy cannot function if dignity is abandoned. Arrogance may grab headlines, disrespect may fill the airwaves, but in the end it is steadiness, clarity, and integrity that leave a lasting mark. Crockett's presence embodied that truth, making it visible for millions to witness. In speeches after the hearing, she leaned into that lesson. Silence, she told an audience in Texas, can be powerful, but the right words at the right time can shake a nation. The crowd rose to its feet, not because they had seen a viral clip, but because they understood what it meant. That one person's courage could remind an entire country of the values it aspires to. That's the heart of this story. Not the spectacle of Cruz fumbling, not the memes or late-night jokes, but the affirmation that respect matters, that truth matters, that arrogance, no matter how loud, eventually collapses under the weight of its own emptiness, and that when a woman of conviction decides to speak, her words carry generations with them. The final image lingers, Cruz staring down at his papers, fumbling to find a rebuttal, while Crockett sat steady, composed, her words still hanging in the chamber like a quiet anthem. It was more than a takedown. It was a reminder. To him, to the Senate, to the nation, that dignity is not just a personal trait. It is a democratic necessity. And as viewers clicked off their screens, as hashtags faded into memory, the lesson remained. In every workplace, every classroom, every dinner table where someone feels the urge to dismiss or diminish another voice, Crockett's example now stands as a counterweight, a living reminder that arrogance may interrupt, but dignity always finishes the sentence. Because in the end, it wasn't just Jasmine Crockett who won that day. It was every person who has ever waited patiently to be heard, every voice that has ever been silenced, every citizen who still believes that justice belongs to the steady, not the smug. And that is why this moment will endure, not as a spectacle, but as a story of respect over disrespect, truth over noise, dignity over arrogance. A story that continues to echo, long after the chamber fell silent. In the end, the title told the story. Ted Cruz interrupted Jasmine Crockett 6 times, but it was his 7th attempt that became his undoing. What he thought would be another moment to assert dominance, instead revealed his own fragility and highlighted Crockett's unshakable strength. This wasn't just a viral skirmish. It was a moral lesson delivered in real time. In front of the nation, arrogance always collapses under the weight of truth. And dignity, though quieter, always commands the longer echo. As viewers, we're not just spectators. We're participants in the kind of country we choose to amplify. Every clip we share, every story we tell, every voice we elevate shapes the values that define America. Crockett showed us that composure and courage can silence even the loudest bluster. But it's up to us to make sure those lessons don't fade with the news cycle. So if this moment spoke to you, if you felt that fire of recognition when she refused to be silenced, join this movement. Subscribe for more stories that shine a light on dignity over disrespect, truth over arrogance, courage over noise. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters. And add your voice to the chorus demanding better from those who claim to lead us. Because this wasn't just a showdown between 2 lawmakers. It was a reflection of the America we're still fighting for. An America where power listens when people speak, and where arrogance crumbles under the steady weight of justice. And as the chamber proved that day, so will history. America still listens when courage speaks,